The stench of decay hung thick in the air, a miasma of rot and despair that clung to every surface in the forgotten sector. Blanc, her pristine white uniform a stark contrast to the grimy surroundings, stepped gingerly over a pile of rusted scrap metal. Her bright blue eyes darted nervously from shadow to shadow, searching for any sign of movement in the derelict wasteland that was now her assigned post. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing off the crumbling walls of abandoned buildings. "Is anyone there? I'm Blanc, your new squad member." Her cheerful tone felt jarringly out of place in the oppressive silence. Blanc's smile faltered for a moment as she realized the full extent of her isolation. This wasn't the glorious posting she had imagined when she was first activated. The neglected sector was a far cry from the shining citadels and bustling command centers she had trained in. A sudden skittering sound made Blanc whirl around, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. A mutated rat, its fur patchy and eyes glowing an unnatural red, scurried across her path. Blanc let out a nervous laugh, trying to shake off the creeping unease that threatened to overwhelm her optimism. "Come on, Blanc," she muttered to herself. "You can do this. It's just a little quiet, that's all. Nothing wrong with peace and quiet, right?" As she ventured deeper into the sector, the dilapidated buildings began to loom over her, their broken windows like empty eye sockets staring down at the lone Nikke. The silence was occasionally broken by the groan of settling metal or the distant rumble of what Blanc desperately hoped was just thunder. Hours passed, and Blanc's initial enthusiasm had long since faded into a grim determination. She had yet to encounter a single other Nikke, or even a living human. The sector seemed utterly abandoned, left to rot by those who had once called it home. It was then, as the artificial day cycle began to dim into an oppressive twilight, that Blanc noticed something odd, a faint glow emanating from beneath her feet, barely visible through the cracks in the pavement. Curiosity overrode caution, and she knelt down to investigate. "What in the world?" Blanc murmured, her fingers tracing the outline of a hidden seam in the ground. With a grunt of effort, she managed to pry open a concealed hatch, revealing a dark passageway leading deep underground. The rational part of Blanc's mind screamed at her to report this discovery immediately. But something else, a primal instinct she couldn't quite name, urged her to descend into the unknown. Taking a deep breath, Blanc lowered herself into the passage, the hatch closing ominously behind her. The underground facility was a maze of sterile white corridors, a sharp contrast to the decaying world above. Blanc's footsteps echoed loudly as she made her way deeper into the complex, her weapon drawn and ready. The air here was thick with an acrid chemical smell that made her eyes water and her throat burn. As she rounded a corner, Blanc froze. There, huddled in the shadows, was another Nikke. The figure was so still that for a moment, Blanc thought she might be looking at a deactivated unit. But then the Nikke's head snapped up, revealing a pair of haunted eyes that seemed to pierce right through Blanc. "Hello," Blanc stammered, lowering her weapon slightly. "I'm Blanc. Are you okay?" The other Nikke didn't respond, her gaze darting nervously between Blanc and the corridor behind her. Up close, Blanc could see the toll that isolation had taken on the other Nikke. Her dark hair was matted and unkempt, her uniform torn and stained. But it was the look in her eyes that truly unnerved Blanc, a mixture of fear, desperation, and something else. Something feral. "It's all right," Blanc said softly, taking a cautious step forward. "I'm not going to hurt you. What's your name?" The other Nikke's lips moved, but no sound came out. She seemed to be struggling to form words, as if she had forgotten how to speak. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she managed to croak out a single word. "Noir." Blanc's eyes widened in recognition. "Noir? But you were reported KIA years ago? How are you here?" Noir's only response was to press herself further into the corner, her body trembling violently. Blanc's heart ached at the sight. Whatever Noir had endured in this facility, it had clearly left deep scars. Before Blanc could say anything else, a deafening alarm began to blare throughout the complex. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in a hellish glow, and Noir let out a strangled cry of terror. "We have to go," Blanc said urgently, reaching out to help Noir to her feet. "Come on, I'll get you out of here." But Noir shook her head frantically, pointing down the corridor with a shaking hand. Blanc turned to look, and her blood ran cold at the sight that greeted her. A mass of writhing tentacles was emerging from a previously hidden doorway, each appendage tipped with razor-sharp barbs. The creature, if it could even be called that, pulsed with an otherworldly energy that made Blanc's skin crawl. "Rapture," Noir whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. Blanc's training kicked in, and she raised her weapon, firing a barrage of shots at the approaching monstrosity. The bullets seemed to have little effect, merely sinking into the creature's gelatinous flesh without slowing its advance. "Run!" Blanc shouted, grabbing Noir's arm and pulling her to her feet. The two Nikkes sprinted down the corridor, the sound of tearing metal and shattering glass echoing behind them as the Rapture entity pursued. Noir stumbled, nearly falling, but Blanc's grip on her arm kept her upright. "Don't give up," Blanc panted, her cheerful facade cracking under the weight of their dire situation. "We're getting out of here together, I promise." They rounded a corner, only to find themselves face to face with a sealed blast door. Blanc frantically searched for a way to open it, but the control panel was dark and unresponsive. "No, no, no," Blanc muttered, her fingers flying over the dead keys. There has to be a way out. Behind them, the sound of the approaching Rapture grew louder. Noir whimpered, pressing herself against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. Blanc's mind raced, searching for a solution. Her eyes fell on a ventilation shaft above them, just large enough for a Nikke to squeeze through. "Up there," she said, pointing. "I'll boost you up, then you pull me in after you." Noir hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. Blanc took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Trust me," she said softly. "We're in this together now." Something in Noir's expression shifted, a flicker of determination breaking through the terror. She nodded once, allowing Blanc to boost her up to the vent. With trembling hands, Noir pried off the grate and pulled herself inside. The Rapture entity rounded the corner just as Noir reached down to help Blanc up. Blanc felt a searing pain as one of the creature's barbed tentacles grazed her leg, tearing through flesh and synthetic muscle. She bit back a scream, using every ounce of her strength to pull herself into the vent. The two Nikkes crawled through the cramped shaft, the sound of tearing metal behind them spurring them on. Blanc's injured leg left a trail of luminescent blue fluid, the lifeblood of Nikke's, but she forced herself to keep moving. Finally, they emerged into the open air of the forgotten sector. The hatch they had escaped through shuddered and bulged as the Rapture entity tried to force its way through. "We need to seal it," Noir said, her voice stronger now that they were out of immediate danger. There's a failsafe, but it requires both of us." Blanc nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Together, they limped to a nearby control panel, their hands moving in perfect synchronization as they input the complex series of commands. The ground beneath their feet began to rumble, and Blanc watched in awe as massive steel plates emerged from hidden compartments, sealing off the entire underground complex. The Rapture entity's inhuman screech was cut off abruptly as the final plate slammed into place. For a moment, there was silence. Then Blanc let out a shaky laugh, turning to Noir with a weary smile. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." Noir's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. We make a good team," she said softly, her voice still rough from disuse. As the adrenaline faded, the pain in Blanc's leg flared up with renewed intensity. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Noir caught her, supporting her weight without hesitation. "Your turn to trust me," Noir said, her eyes meeting Blanc's with a newfound determination. "I know a place we can hide, recover. It's not much, but—" Blanc nodded, leaning on Noir as they made their way through the desolate landscape. "It's more than enough," she said, "as long as we're together." As they limped away from the sealed hatch, neither Nikke noticed the hairline fracture that had appeared in one of the steel plates. Nor did they hear the faint, rhythmic thumping coming from deep below the surface, a sound like a monstrous heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing moment. The horror they had faced was not over. It was only just beginning. But in the bond forged between Blanc and Noir, a glimmer of hope had been kindled, a light in the darkness that would guide them through the trials to come.